Okay, this time what I am going to discuss is about instrumentation. Most specifically, the validity and reliability of your research instrument. First, we have to take note, bakit ba kailangan natin ng instrumentation or ng instrument? This is for us to gather data. And what do we mean by data? So, data is a variable. Commonly, it's a dependent variable that we measure. Diba? If you look at the functions of relations in the variables of your study, ang kadalasan mini-measure natin is the dependent variable. But if for example, ako relational research, no, pwede naman nating i-measure both independent and dependent variable. However, again, commonly, what we measure in our study is the dependent variable. In quantitative research, definitely, the dependent variable is numerical in nature. And since it's numerical, it may follow a scale of measurement. It can be nominal, ordinal, interval, or a ratio data. Diniscuss na po ito nung first quarter. I hope you can remember. Diniscuss din ulit ito ni Sir Sokalit during the webinar about research data analysis. And I hope, no, nung kayo ay nasa grade 11 sa statistics nyo, and nung junior high school kayo, naituro na sa inyo kung ano yung nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. As science students, no, that living a life of mathematics, science, and research, dapat you know already by heart kung ano ibig sabihin ng nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio data. Your numerical data may also be continuous or discrete, depending on the variables you are measuring. If the variable you're investigating can be counted, then the data should be discrete. So, commonly, ito yung mga nominal and ordinal data. So, binibilang lang natin minsan kung ilan yung nag-fit sa ganitong category, sino yung mas marami, sino yung mas konti, and we arrange them by rank. So, nominal and ordinal are discrete data. And if the variables are measured, they are expected to be continuous data, like interval and ratio. Based on what you gather from the respondents, data are categorized as facts, attitudes, and feelings. So we can measure them, diba? Through rating scales. Judgment, psychomotor skills. Pwede natin silang gamitan ulit na criteria, rating, rubrics. Results of tests and experiments. And all other from the primary and secondary sources. So talking about primary and secondary sources, ano tong mga ito at paano siya ginagamit sa research? So first, the primary source of data comes from, again, primary sources. Primary data comes from primary sources such as individual persons or organized groups or organization. So, paano ba natin kinukuha yung data sa kanila? Sina-survey natin sila, ini-interview natin, pwede natin silang i-observe, pwede natin silang bigyan ng tests or exams to measure certain qualities or behavior of these people or group. It may also come from established practices, documents in their original form. Diba? Talagang letter na sinulat ni Dr. Jose Rizal kay Josephine Brackett. So, yung exact copy ng letter na yun, that is a primary source. A living organism, when we do experiment in the laboratory and observe plants and animals and we list down our observation. So, that's a primary data source. A man-made material or things, diba? Halimbawa, artifact, a video, a recorded conversation. Yan. And natural objects and phenomena. If you gather the data using these methods or way, we consider them primary data. Okay? Kapag kayo mismo mga researcher, yung naghagilap nitong datos na to at kayo mismo nakuha, gamit yung iba't ibang methods and instruments na yon, we consider them as primary data. For secondary source naman, okay, secondary data comes from sources like books, articles published in professional publications, unpublished master's thesis and dissertations, monographs, manuscripts, and all other second-hand sources. Ito naman po ay nanggaling sa mga related literature and study. So, for your research, okay, we use the secondary source of data to establish the background of your research, the research gap, the hypotheses, and the framework of the study. So, doon natin siya ginagamit sa Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. While the primary source of data, we use that in Chapter 4 and 5, yung analysis and interpretation na. Diba? Because what we do is we would like to test hypotheses, we would like to describe the nature of our respondents. So, we gather data from them. And the data that we must gather are primary data. So, tayo mismo yung nag-measure, tayo mismo yung nagpa-survey, tayo mismo yung nag-observe ng mga behaviors na gusto nating i-measure at i-observe. Alright? Sir, ibig sabihin hindi pwedeng gumamit ng secondary source of data sa analysis. Pwede siyang gamitin to compare the result of your primary data to other literature. There are also studies that compares secondary sources without getting a primary source of data. For example, may nakita kang 5 researches, no, about, let's say, the effectiveness of bayabas extract, guava leaves extract in fighting bacteria. So, may nakuha kang 5 references, tapos kinumpare mo yung results ng 5 references na yon. Okay? Another, halimbawa, yung effectiveness ng ivermectin as a drug. No, may nakita kang halimbawa 5 or 10 studies about how ivermectin is used as a drug. And then, in your chapter 4, what you did is you compared the results of different studies para malaman mo talaga ano yung gamit ng ivermectin. So, kapag secondary data yung ginagamit for analysis sa chapter 4 and 5, we call that research or that analysis meta-analysis. Okay? Kasi, na-analyze na yung data ng original researchers. Ngayon, i-analyze mo ulit by comparing it with other similar or related studies. So, we call that meta-analysis. And pwede yun. Pwede yung ganong klase ng research. Okay? Pero mas maganda pa rin kung ikaw mismo yung magagather ng iyong data through primary sources. Okay. Now, in relation to data, very important yung instrumentation. So, instrumentation is constructed as one of the most important parts in your research study. This is the time that you're going to decide how you will collect the data, prepare your instrument, prepare the materials and the processes that you will use to collect the data, apply the process, and gather the data itself. So, in terms of instrumentation, you have to know the word instrument, which is the generic term used by other researchers when they talk about how to collect the data. So, the instrument can be a survey. Kapag qualitative, di ba, pwedeng interview, pwedeng mga written conversation or essays. Yan. Pwedeng exams. Pwedeng talagang yung instrument na gagamitin mo ay measuring instrument like graduated cylinder, thermometer, meter stick. Yan. Depende kung ano yung mga variables na ino-observe mo. Okay? So, again, this is a generic term used to talk about how you do the data collection. Instrumentation is the course of action. Ito yung proseso to which you develop, you test, and use a certain device or a certain instrument. There are 2 categories of instruments. We have researcher-completed instruments. As researcher, kayo yung magsasagot or kayo yung magsusulat doon sa instrument na yon. We also have subject-completed instrument na ang sasagot naman ay yung respondents ninyo. Okay? Sila yung magsusulat ng kanilang response, sila yung magre-rate ng kanilang sarili, sila yung magsasagot ng mga questions, ng mga statements, and so on. Under research-completed instruments, we have rating scales. Diba? Halimbawa, gusto mong malaman kung gaano kagaling yung kanilang oral communication skills. So, pag re-recitein mo sila ng isang poem or ng isang speech, and then meron kang rubrics, no? Halimbawa, confidence, anong score niya? Clarity, anong score niya? Grammar, anong score? So, rating scales, yan. Na si researcher as an observer, in-observe niya yung behavior at in-scorean niya. We have interview schedules and guides. O, ito yung ginamit niyo sa qualitative research, diba? Before you conducted the interview, meron kayong, tawag mo dito, meron kayong guide questions, no? Na habang nag-uusap kayo, unti-unti yung nafe-fill in yung nang sagot yung inyong interview guide. Tally sheets. So, minsan ginagamit to sa laboratory, di ba? Halimbawa, ilang dahon na yung tumubo doon sa halaman ng day 1 o day 2, ilan? So, nililista mo, tinatali mo siya. Okay? Or halimbawa, how many participants agreed to vote this candidate? So, nagtaas sila ng kamay, pinilang mo, tinali mo. So, that's another researcher-completed instrument. Flowcharts. Okay? So, may mga proseso ka na susundan, tinitignan mo ano yung unang nangyari, nilista mo, pangalawang nangyari, nilista mo, pangatlo, ayan. So, you created a flowchart. Performance checklist. For example, ano yung mga indicators na yung isang estudyante ay pwede nang pumasok sa grade 1? So, una, dapat 6 years old and above. Check. Dapat marunong nang bumasa. Pinabasa mo? Check. Dapat marunong nang magbilang. Pinabilang mo? Check. Dapat marunong mag-identify ng colors and shapes. Pinagawa mo? Check. So, yan, performance checklist. Time and motion logs. Ito ginagamit to minsan kadalasan sa physics, no? 'Di ba? At certain time, gaano kalayo yung nagagalaw ng isang object. Okay? Or sa bawat galaw ng sa oras, gaano kabilis nag-change yung speed or yung velocity ng isang object. So, ayan. Or any other observation form. 'Di ba? Halimbawa, after 1 hour, ano yung temperature ng isang nung solution na ginamit mo. After 2 hours, nililista mo, ino-observe mo, gaano yung kalamig or kainit, anong change in temperature na nangyari. Okay, for example, may mga petri dish ka. Okay? O yung isang culture 1, gaano kalaki yung area na hindi tumubo yung bacteria? So, zone of inhibition ang tawag natin doon. O sa petri dish 2, gaano kalaki yung hindi tinubuan na na area? Ayan. Diba? Halimbawa, nag-test ka nag-drop test ka, no, ng hollow blocks. So, after 1 meter, nilaglag mo, hindi nabasag. Sulat mo, 1 meter. Yung 2 meters, nilaglag mo, hindi pa rin nabasag. Ilista mo. 3 meters, nilaglag mo ulit yung hollow blocks. Tsaka siya nabasag. So, ililista mo siya sa iyong observation form. Okay? So, pwede siyang gamitin sa lab, pwede siyang gamitin sa pag-observe ng mga tao, ng behavior, and so on. For subject-completed instruments, we have questionnaires, di ba? Survey. Self-checklist. Kanina yung checklist, si researcher yung nagche-check kung na-achieve na ba niya. Pwedeng self-checklist, si participant mismo yung mag-evaluate sa sarili niya. Halimbawa, check all statements that are applicable to you. Diba? I wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning to prepare for my class. I brush my teeth after I wake up. I eat breakfast before the class starts. I wash my face before the class starts. I comb my hair before the class starts. So, yan. Pag ginagawa mo yan, check ko lang siya ng check. So, that's checklist. Attitude scales. Ayan, di ba? Yung level of motivation, level of happiness, sadness, depression, anxiety, and stress scale. So, those are the attitude scales or behavioral scales. Personality inventories. Di ba? Halimbawa, yung introversion. Are you an introvert or extrovert? So, may mga test na tinitake para malaman mo kung ano ba yung kasang categories ka kasama. Diba? Learning styles. Ayan. Are you a visual, an auditory, an audiovisual, or kinesthetic learner? The multiple intelligence test. Example ng personality inventories. Achievement or aptitude test. Ito yung mga exams na tinitake ninyo sa klase. Di ba? Gaano ka kagaling sa math? So, kapag mataas yung score mo sa math exam, ibig sabihin, magaling ka sa math. Ayan. Kung hindi ka nandaya or kung hindi ka nangula. Di ba? Hindi tsamba lang yung pagiging mataas sa score mo. So, that may tell na you really are good in that certain subject or that certain behavior or variable that is being measured. Projective devices and sociometric devices. So, these are different instruments na mape-predict yung behavior ng isang individual. Attitude, characteristics, and so on. Now, one thing that you have to consider in your research instrument is validity. Validity refers to the extent to which the instrument measures what it intends to measure and perform as it designed to perform. For example, gumamit ka ng instrument para malaman yung environmental awareness. So, dapat, for example, kung sa research mo gusto mong malaman yung level of environmental awareness, dapat yung instrument na gagamitin mo talagang nagme-measure ng environmental awareness. For example, gusto mong malaman yung kanilang consumer buying behavior. O dapat, yung instrument na gagamitin mo talagang magme-measure ng buying behavior. Okay? Kaya nga din, sinasabihan ko kayo sa inyong research, gawin yung consistent yung mga terms na ginagamit ninyo. So, halimbawa, ang nilagay niya doon ay, I want to know environmental, tawag mo dito? Environmental action. Tapos yung instrument niya is environmental awareness. O pareho ba yun? Magkapareho ba yung meaning ng environmental action at environmental awareness? Yung instrument mo ay tungkol sa environmental awareness, na may measure niya ba yung variable na gusto mong i-measure, which is environmental action? So, kung hindi, it's either hahanap ka ng instrument na align doon sa variable na gusto mong i-measure, or kung gusto mo mag-stick doon sa instrument, palitan mo yung variable mo. Pag pinalitan mo yung variable mo, palitan mo yung background, palitan mo yung framework, palitan mo yung review of related literature. So, ganun yung mangyayari. Kaya sa simula pa lang, kahit na nag-gather pa lang kayo ng background information, dapat doon na mismo, naghahanap na kayo ng instrument or ng methods ng pag-solve dun sa mga questions ninyo. Okay, halimbawa, gusto nyong malaman kung effective ba yung isang extract, no, sa pagpatay ng fungi, halimbawa. So, yung instrument dapat hinahanap niyo siya sa related literature para pag nag-design kayo ng inyong method later on, sigurado kayo na antifungal property. Kung halimbawa, antifungal property yung gusto nyo malaman sa inyong instrument or sa inyong instrumentation, talagang antifungal property yung inyong tinetest. Baka mamaya ang title mo is the antifungal property of for example, grape extract. Bawal lang yan. Wala akong malinaw na basehan doon. Tapos, ang ginawa mo, antifungal property yan, di ba? Pero ang ginawa mo sa iyong testing, kinuha mo lang yung kinuha mo lang yung phytochemical analysis ng grape extract. Hindi mo naman siya tinest kung nakapatay talaga siya ng fungi. So, hindi niya na-achieve yung gusto mong i-measure na variable. Another is, halimbawa, tinest mo siya, pero sa bacteria mo tinest. So, hindi niya na-achieve yung antifungal property, antibacterial property yung tinest mo. So, yan. Importante, no? It involves collecting and analyzing data to assess the accuracy of an instrument. You have to make sure that the variable you are measuring is really the variable that will answer to your research problem. There are 3 types of validity: content, construct, and criterion. Actually, may pang-apat. Face validity. Face as in mukha. So, kasama dito yung itsura ng font, yung laki, yung color ng font, yung printing mo ng iyong survey, malinaw ba siya? Ayan, pati yung margin, yung font size, madali ba siyang basahin? Kasama din dito yung quality ng paper. Ayan, so face validity. Pati yung grammar. Ayan, punctuation, use of words. So, dun yun sa face validity pumapasok. Okay, pero what we would like to focus on is content, construct, and criterion validity. Pag sinabi natin content validity, the extent to which a research instrument accurately measures all aspects of construct. It focuses on whether the instrument adequately covers all the contents with respect to the variable. For example, ang sinabi mo ay mathematical skills. Okay, you would like to measure the mathematical skills. Dapat yung content ng exam mo na ibibigay ay tungkol sa mathematical skills, tungkol sa math. Okay? For example, specifically, sabi mo mathematical skills, pero specific ka lang to factoring trinomials. Okay? Based on content validity, dapat yung exam, yung laman ng exam na gagamitin mo is about factoring trinomials. Hindi ka pwede nang maglagay ng tungkol sa subset. Hindi ka pwede nang maglagay ng factoring, for example, linear equation. Pwede ba factor ng linear equation? Pwede naman. No? Or halimbawa, graphic. Hindi ka pwede maglagay doon kasi hindi siya pasok sa content. Ang content mo lang ay factoring of trinomials. So, dapat tungkol doon yung exam mo. Okay? Halimbawa, nagme-measure ka ng motivation, no? So, dapat yung mga statements mo doon is about motivation. Talagang mare-reflect niya, mame-measure niya yung motivation, which is the variable that you're aiming to measure. So, yun yung content validity. Dapat tugma yung nilalaman ng exam, ng survey, or ng anumang instrument doon sa gusto mong i-measure na variable. Next, we have construct validity. This refers to whether you can draw inferences about test scores related to a concept being studied. For example, gumamit ka ng instrument about mathematical skills. So, una tayo naman yung sa example ko. Mathematical skills. Okay? Dapat, yung instrument mo na yon talagang mapipredict yung behavior. For example, kapag mataas yung score sa test, dapat sinasabi niya talaga na magaling sa math yung isang individual. Okay? Or another example, kapag yung anxiety scale, no? Kapag mataas yung score ng anxiety scale, niya doon sa anxiety scale na sinagutan, dapat may inform mo na mataas talaga yung anxiety ng isang individual na yun. So, yun naman sa construct validity. What you measure must give you an inference of how the persons or the subjects behave based on that instrument. So, kapag mataas yung resultang lumabas doon, dapat talagang mataas yung behavior na nagmamanifest sa isang individual. Hindi pwedeng, halimbawa, mataas yung kanyang level of motivation, for example, doon sa exam. Tapos, in-observe mo siya, hindi naman siya mukhang motivated. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, in terms of construct validity, bagsak yung test mo. Kasi hindi niya na-measure ng maayos eh. Diba? Kahit na hindi motivated yung individual, lumabas pa rin sa result ng exam or ng scale mo na mataas yung motivation niya. There are 3 types of evidence that we can use to demonstrate a research instrument has construct validity. First is homogeneity, next is convergence, and then theory of evidence. For homogeneity, the instrument measures only one construct. Gaya nga nung sinabi ko kanina, if your exam is about motivation, no? The level of motivation in studying. So, hindi mo dapat papasukan yun ng instrument ng questions na tungkol sa kung anong learning style nila. Hindi mo dapat lagyan ng ano yung satisfaction level nila sa teaching methods or sa programs ng school. Dapat tungkol lang yun lahat sa motivation. Kasi yun yung sinusukat mo. Or yung kanina, yung mathematical test, no? Kung about factoring of trinomials yun, then dapat yung lahat ng questions is about factoring trinomial. Kapag may nadagdag doon na iba, hindi pasok doon sa variable na minimeasure mo, na-violate niya yung homogeneity. Next is convergence. It occurs when an instrument measures concepts similar to that of other instruments. Although if there are no similar instruments available, this will not be possible. So, halimbawa, gumawa ka ng instrument about level of motivation. Tapos, kinompare mo siya sa dati ng standard test ng motivation. Or may nakita ka pang ibang instruments ng motivation. So, dapat, in terms of convergence, kung mataas yung resulta ng motivation niya sa test na ginawa mo, dapat mataas din yung resulta ng motivation niya doon sa iba pang instruments na nagme-measure ng motivation. Yun yung sinasabi ng convergence. No, para masabi mong valid siya dahil mataas doon sa ibang motivation test at mataas din siya sa motivation test mo. Ibig sabihin na may measure mo ng tama gamit yung instrument mo, yung level of motivation talaga nila. And then we have theory of evidence. Evident when behavior is like theoretical propositions of the construct measured in an instrument. Gaya nga nung sabi ko kanina, base sa resulta ng test mo, mataas yung motivation niya. Tapos in-observe mo siya, dapat nakikita mo na mataas talaga yung kanyang motivation. Diba? Nagpa-participate siya sa klase, gumagawa siya ng outputs niya on her own. Diba? Masaya siya sa ginagawa niya. So, yun yung mga manifestations na mataas yung motivation ng isang individual. Kung ano yung resulta niya sa exam, dapat na-observe mo din sa totoong buhay. Yan, example, when an instrument measures anxiety, one would expect that the participants who score high on the instrument for anxiety also demonstrate symptoms of anxiety in their day-to-day lives. Last type of validity is criterion validity. Ito naman, it refers to any other instrument that measures the same variable. Sa criterion validity, kino-compare natin yung instrument mo sa iba pang instrument kung sila ay nagtutugma ba. So we have convergent validity, divergent validity, and predictive validity. In order to determine criterion validity, we used to get the correlation. Okay? Correlations can be conducted to determine the extent to which a different instrument measure the same variable. For example, nalaman mo, di ba, na motivation is directly related to happiness. Is directly related to initiative. Okay? So we can get convergent validity. So, yung instrument mo, which is about motivation, i-correlate mo siya sa instrument na nagme-measure ng happiness or nagme-measure ng satisfaction or nagme-measure ng initiative. Based on theory, kung they are directly proportional, dapat, pag kinorelate mo yung dalawa, they are directly proportional. Kung mataas yung iyong yung motivation sa test mo, dapat doon sa instrument na nagme-measure ng happiness at instrument na nagme-measure ng initiative, mataas din siya. Mataas din yung direction ng mga results, no? Directly proportional sila sa isa't isa. So that's what we call convergent validity. Wag na ito example, medyo may trigger warning example kasi about suicide. Anyway, another criterion validity is divergent naman. So in convergent, dapat pareho sila ng direction. Sa divergent validity naman, opposite direction. Kasi, for example, nalaman mo, kapag mataas yung happiness, commonly, mababa yung loneliness and mababa yung sadness. Okay? So, may skill ka na ginawa about happiness. Okay? At mineasure mo yon, tapos kinorelate mo sa mga instrument na nagme-measure ng sadness at ng loneliness. So, dapat, based on divergent validity, opposite ng direction yung variables. Kung mataas yung kanyang happiness, dapat mababa yung loneliness and sadness. Score niya doon sa dalawang instrument na yun. And we have predictive validity. The instrument should have high correlation with future criterions. For example, a score of high self-efficacy related to performing a task should predict the likelihood a participant completing a task. For example, in a test, no, nalaman mo na meron siya dapat mataas na tawag mo dito, mataas na mathematical skills dun sa exam. Tinag-take mo siya, di ba? Sabi niya, I can, logical mathematical skills. I like solving puzzles. I like answering mathematical questions. I like ganyan-ganyan. Tapos, that would predict na pag binigyan mo siya ng exams na tungkol sa math, pag binigyan mo siya ng exams about logic, about puzzle, mapaperform niya ng maayos or ng tama kasi mataas yung score niya. So, yun naman yung tinatawag na predictive validity. Okay? So, yun yung tatlong klase ng validity, of content, construct, and criterion. Sir, lahat ba yun kailangan naming gawin? Hindi naman kayo mag-instrument testing maliban sa grupo nila, Paul. Okay? So, hindi nyo naman kailangan i-test lahat ng validity. So, kahit ang pinaka-importante dito sa tatlong to is yung content validity na lang on your level. Probably pag kayo ay nag-college or nag-master's degree, tsaka nyo na gagawin yung construct and criterion validity. However, if you can provide, based on literature, that your instrument has high construct and criterion validity, pwede nyo siyang isama sa inyong discussion ng instrument sa chapter 3. Alright, nakuha po ba natin yon? I hope that is clear. O, nakuha ni Christian. Thank you, Christian, for responding. Next naman is reliability. So, yung validity is about accuracy of your instrument in measuring the variable that you want to measure. Reliability naman is about precision. Diba? Gaano kapareho yung mga resultang nakuha mo. Kasi kapag pare-pareho yung resulta, ibig sabihin, reliable yung instrument mo. Okay? Kasi kung paulit-ulit na nag-a-appear yung similar results, ibig sabihin, it really measures the variable well. So, that's reliability. It relates the extent to which the instrument is consistent, and the instrument should be able to obtain approximately the same response when applied to or at a respondents who are similarly situated. Okay, halimbawa, nagbigay ako ng test about learning earth science. Okay? So, kapag mataas yung nakuha ng isang batch doon sa test na yon, expected ko na susunod na batch mataas din. So, kapag sa mga sumunod na batch ay mataas pa rin yung resulta. Diba? Parehong content, parehong exam, pareho ng teaching method na ginamit, at pareho yung exam results na lumalabas paulit-ulit. Ibig sabihin, reliable yung iyong instrument or yung exam. Kasi, ganun at ganun yung lumalabas. No? Ganun at ganun yung resultang nakukuha mo kung paulit-ulit mo siyang ginagamit. Pero halimbawa, biglang nagbago-bago yung resulta, ibig sabihin, there is a possibility na kaya siya mataas, it's because of chance, or kaya siya bumaba because of chance. Diba? Sa physics, I think discuss nyo to, at sa chemistry, yung importance ng reliability sa measurement. Kasi minsan, baka may error no, sa ating pagme-measure, kaya hindi siya pare-pareho or hindi nagiging precise yung ating nakukuhang values. When the instrument is applied to different points in time, the response must highly correlate with one another. There are several ways to determine reliability. First is internal consistency or homogeneity. Kagaya kanina sa validity, no, importante yung homogeneity. It is the extent to which all the items on a scale measure one construct. Again, dapat pare-pareho yung mini-measure. Iisa lang. For example, nagme-measure ka ng motivation. Okay, so may 10 statements ka about motivation. Diba? Kung yung sa 1, ang score niya sa motivation ay high, dapat yung sa 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, ini-expect din natin na high. Ngayon, kung iba-iba yung scores niya, may mataas, may mababa, may gitna. So, nasisira yung internal consistency noong statements na yon. Therefore, it suggests na hindi reliable yung iyong instrument. Kasi kung gusto mong malaman kung talagang motivated sila, kapag dapat lahat sila high sa 10 or lahat sila low doon sa 10 statements na yon, para makita mo talaga na they are motivated or not. Kung iba-iba yung answer nila, hindi reliable yung iyong instrument. Hindi niya na-achieve yung internal consistency or homogeneity. Through questions or indicators, and each question must correlate highly with the total for this dimension. Aside from homogeneity and internal consistency, we look also at the stability or the test-retest correlation. Isa sa mga paraan to test reliability is to let participants take the test repeatedly. Okay? Pwedeng similar participants, pwedeng iba't ibang participants. Halimbawa, meron kang 5 grupo. So, sa bawat grupo na yon, pinag-take mo sila ng exam, tapos kinompare mo yung resulta nila. So, that's test-retest correlation. Iba-ibang grupo yung nag-test. Pwede rin naman, similar group yung nagte-test, no? Binigay mo sa group 1 na isang beses, tapos binigay mo ulit sa kanila ng another time pa. So, para makita mo kung talagang reliable yung iyong instrument, pag pareho yung result nila sa una at sa pangalawa, so doon mo mape-predict na, paulit-ulit lang yung resulta, reliable yung test ko. Pwede rin siya through time. Binigay mo sa isang batch, next year, bibigay mo ulit, ipapatest mo. Kapag same lang yung result na lumalabas, pareho matataas yung nakuha mong resulta, then is established na mataas yung reliability ng instrument mo, and it's a good instrument. Yan. Scores on a test are essentially invariant over time, hindi nagbabago. And then we have equivalence. Ito din, para kanina, i-compare mo yung test mo with other instruments. Okay? If they measure similar construct, kapag mataas yung isang instrument, dapat mataas din siya doon sa iyong instrument. So, yun naman reliability in terms of construct. Pareho sila ng mini-measure na value. Kapag pareho silang mataas, then it tells you na reliable yung dalawang instrument kasi pareho sila ng lumalabas na resulta. What are the characteristics of a good research instrument? First, it must be valid and reliable. Hence, we discuss validity and reliability of instrument. It must be based on conceptual framework or the statement of the problem. Kaya nga, di ba, wait lang. Anyway. Okay. So, wait lang. It must be based on conceptual framework or statement of the problem. Dapat naka-align siya sa iyong SOP, sa iyong research questions, at sa iyong conceptual framework. It must gather data relevant to research problem and test the hypothesis in relation to number 3. It must contain questions or items that are unequivocal. Ibig sabihin, yung resulta na makuha mo, kaya nga kanina sa valid and reliable, no? Talagang there is no other interpretation in that instrument. Kung ito yung lumabas, ito yung nakuha mo, ito yung na-measure mo, ito na talaga yung sagot doon sa question na yung pinost sa yung question. So that means it's unequivocal. No? Isa lang yung interpretation na pwedeng lumabas from that instrument. It must contain clear and definite directions to be answered by the respondents. Ayan. Are they going to choose one option? Are they allowed to have multiple responses? Are they going to check, to cross, to encircle the letter of the answer? Should if they're going to rate themselves from 1 to 5, ano yung ibig sabihin ng 1, ng 2, ng 3, ng 4, and 5? Very good ba yun? Highly satisfied ba siya? Strongly agree? So, dapat malinaw kung paano sasagutan yung inyong instrument. Diba? Para hindi sila nalilito. Kasi kapag mali instruction mo, definitely, mali yung makakuha mong data. If the instrument is a mechanical device, it must be the best or the latest model. Kaya nga nagre-recalibrate ng mga instrument. Halimbawa, yung measuring stick, diba dapat siguraduhin mo na yung distance ng 1 cm to 2 cm ay equal to the distance of 2 cm to 3 cm. So, you calibrate, you check, you get the best instrument. Diba, kung kuha kayo ng weighing scale, dapat yung gumagana ng maayos, gumagana ng matino. Yung thermometer ninyo, dapat accurate yung pag-measure niya ng temperature. Yan. So, kapag mga devices yung ginagamit natin. Then, it must be accompanied by a good and proper cover letter. So, di ba, sa simula ng instrument, dapat may consent form. Nakapalagay doon tungkol saan yun, anong gagawin nila, ano yung benefits and harm na pwede nilang makuha, and then, pipirmahan nila for their agreement to participate at hindi sila napilitan lang or pinuwersa. And also, it must be accompanied by a letter of recommendation from a sponsor, especially if you're going to do the testing in an institution. Halimbawa, magsa-survey ka sa isang school. So, dapat permado ng principal, pinayagan niya. Or halimbawa, magte-test ka ng experiment sa lab. Dapat may recommendation yun ng laboratory or ng scientist or ng kung sino man yung magbibigay sa inyo ng recommendation to conduct the testing in that facility or institution. Here are other things to remember in terms of ethics in using an instrument. When the scales or questionnaires are openly available for commercial and research purposes, there is no need to contact the original authors to ask for permission. So may mga instrument no na open for public use, for public consumption. Talagang may mga ibang instrument na sinasabi that they encourage to use this instrument to measure this variable. So kapag sinabi na pwede siyang gamitin openly, then you don't need to ask permission. But you have to cite definitely the source, the research work where you got the instrument. However, if it is not stated that you can use an instrument, no? Or if it explicitly said that you need to seek permission first, kasi may mga instrument na binibili, may mga instrument na kailangan talaga ipagpaalam, whether it can be used for non-commercial or educational purposes, basta hindi sinabi na hindi siya pwede basta gamitin, or talagang direktang sinabi na magpaalam muna, then the researchers must reach out to the original authors, specifically if they will adapt or amend the scale or the original questionnaire. So if you're going to modify or adapt an instrument na hindi siya publicly open for use, ipagpapaalam ninyo sa mga authors. At i-attach nyo yun sa appendix ng research team. Alright! And that ends our lesson for today. Any questions, clarifications, violent reactions? May tanong po ba? Let me see your reaction. Intindihan po ba yung lesson ngayong araw? Thumbs up, check. Or kung ano man, happy. Sige po. Sana malinaw sa atin ito. Okay. And next meeting, ito-check ko kung talaga bang valid, reliable ang inyong instrument and how we can improve it. So, I think wala namang questions. Tap ko na yung record.